The wind moved slowly across the wide Texas plains, bending the tall grass in long, whispering waves that seemed to stretch on forever. The evening sun sat low in the sky, spilling gold and amber light over the lonely land. A single ranch stood miles from the nearest town, its weathered wooden walls marked by years of storms, heat, and silence. Caleb Turner guided his horse along the narrow dirt path leading toward the distant hills. His shoulders were tired, his hands rough from years of work, and his eyes carried the quiet weight of a man who had spent too long speaking only to animals and the wind. The ranch behind him had been his whole world for nearly a decade, ever since he lost the last of his family and chose distance over people. That evening, though, something felt different. He had been riding the fences all afternoon, checking for breaks after a strong windstorm the night before. Clouds still lingered in the distance, dark and heavy, as if the sky hadn't quite finished its anger. The air was cooler than usual, and the silence seemed thicker, almost watchful. Caleb slowed his horse as he noticed something unusual near the edge of the trail. Smoke. It rose in a thin gray line from behind a cluster of mesquite trees. Not the thick smoke of a wildfire. This was smaller, controlled. Someone was camping nearby. He frowned. People didn't usually wander this far out. Not unless they were lost, desperate, or hiding. Carefully, he guided his horse closer. As he moved through the trees, the camp came into view. It was simple. A small fire burned low. A few blankets were spread on the ground. A wooden pot sat near the flames, and beside it, a woman knelt, stirring something slowly. She looked up the moment she heard the horse. Her eyes were sharp and alert, and her body stiffened. She stood quickly, placing herself between Caleb and the two small children sitting behind her. One child clung to her dress. The other watched in silence, wide-eyed. Caleb stopped several yards away and lifted his hands slightly, showing he meant no harm. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said gently. The woman didn't answer right away. She studied him carefully, her dark hair falling loosely over her shoulders, her face strong and calm but guarded. Her clothes were worn, dust-covered, and patched in places. The children looked just as tired. After a long moment, she spoke. "You're on your own land," she said quietly. "We'll move." Her voice carried strength, but also exhaustion. Caleb shook his head. "No, you don't have to leave. I just didn't expect to find anyone out here." The woman's eyes flicked toward the fading sun and then back to him. The night would be cold. The plains were no place for children after dark. Still, she said nothing. Caleb looked at the kids. They couldn't have been older than 6 or 7. Thin, tired, hungry. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. Again, silence. He cleared his throat. "I've got a ranch about a mile west of here. There's food, water, a roof. You and the children can stay the night. No trouble." The woman's jaw tightened slightly. She didn't trust him. He could see it in her eyes. And he didn't blame her. Out here, trust could be dangerous. "I'm not asking for anything," Caleb added quietly. "Just offering help." The little girl behind her tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, I'm cold." That was the moment something in the woman's face changed. The strong, guarded look softened, just a little. She looked down at her daughter, then back at Caleb. Her voice came slowly. "One night." Caleb nodded. "One night is fine." He led the way, riding slowly so they could follow on foot. The boy walked bravely beside his mother, while the little girl held her hand. The sky darkened as they moved, and the first stars began to appear overhead. When the ranch finally came into view, the children's eyes widened. It wasn't a grand place, but it was solid. A wooden house with a wide porch. A barn nearby. A windmill turning slowly in the evening breeze. Warm light glowed from the windows. Caleb dismounted and opened the door. "Come in," he said. The inside was simple but clean. A wooden table, a stone fireplace, shelves lined with jars and supplies. The warmth wrapped around them the moment they stepped inside. The little girl immediately moved closer to the fire. Caleb filled a kettle and set it over the flames. Then he pulled out bread, dried meat, and a jar of preserves. He placed everything on the table. "Eat," he said. "There's more if you need it." The children didn't hesitate. They rushed to the table, hunger winning over caution. The woman remained standing for a moment, watching them. Then slowly, she sat down. For a while, The only sound in the room was the quiet clinking of dishes and the crackle of the fire. Caleb leaned against the wall, giving them space. After some time, the woman spoke again. "My name is Ayanna." Caleb nodded. "Caleb." She looked at him for a long moment. "You live here alone?" "Yes." "No family?" He shook his head once. "Not anymore." Something in her expression shifted. Not pity. Understanding. She glanced around the house. "You were kind to let strangers into your home." Caleb gave a small shrug. "The plains can be hard. Everyone needs help sometimes." Ayanna looked down at her children, who were now eating more slowly, their hunger finally easing. "We were traveling," she said quietly. "To find work. A place to stay." "What happened?" Her eyes darkened. "People don't always welcome us." Caleb didn't ask more. He understood enough. The night grew deeper. He showed them a small spare room at the back of the house. It had 2 beds and thick blankets. "You can stay here," he said. "I'll be in the front room." Ayanna stepped inside, looking at the beds as if she couldn't quite believe they were real. The children were already climbing under the blankets. She turned to Caleb. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded and closed the door, leaving them in peace. Hours passed. The ranch was quiet, the fire low. Caleb sat near the window, staring out into the dark plains. Something about their arrival had stirred a feeling in him he hadn't known for years. A sense that the silence might finally be broken. Sometime after midnight, he heard a sound. At first, he thought it was the wind. Then came a second noise. Hooves. Caleb stood quickly and moved to the door. He opened it slowly and stepped outside. In the distance, shadows moved across the moonlit land. Riders. Several of them. His heart tightened. Trouble this far out never meant anything good. He turned back toward the house, unsure what to do. Then the bedroom door behind him opened. Ayanna stepped out quietly. She had heard them too. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then, without a word, she walked past him and stepped onto the porch. The riders approached slowly, their silhouettes becoming clearer in the moonlight. As they drew closer, Caleb noticed something that made him pause. They weren't armed for a fight. And then, as the first rider reached the edge of the yard, he dismounted. Ayanna stepped forward. The man looked at her, relief flooding his face. He spoke quickly in a language Caleb didn't understand. Ayanna answered him. More riders came forward, their expressions shifting from tension to quiet emotion. Caleb stood frozen, unsure what he was witnessing. Then Ayanna turned back to him. Her eyes were filled with something deep and powerful. "These are my people," she said softly. "They have been searching for us." Caleb blinked. "Searching?" She nodded. The first rider stepped closer. He looked at Caleb with respect, then placed a hand over his heart. Ayanna spoke again. "They thought we were lost." Caleb looked from her to the group of riders and back again. He had expected fear, maybe danger. Instead, there was gratitude in the air. Ayanna walked back toward him slowly. "For days, we had nowhere to go," she said. "No place that would open a door." Her voice caught slightly. "But you did." She stepped closer and held out her hand. Caleb hesitated, then took it. "Tonight," she said, her voice steady but full of feeling, "you gave my children warmth, food, and safety." The riders behind her lowered their heads slightly, a silent gesture of respect. Caleb felt a strange tightness in his chest. "I didn't do much," he said quietly. Ayanna shook her head. "You did everything." The wind moved gently across the plains, carrying the scent of earth and night air. For the first time in years, Caleb didn't feel alone standing there. And as the stars burned bright above the ranch, he realized that a single knock, a single moment of kindness, had changed something far bigger than he ever could have expected. The night air felt different now. Where there had once been silence and loneliness, the ranch was suddenly alive with quiet voices, soft footsteps, and the low, steady sounds of horses breathing in the cool darkness. The riders who had arrived stood respectfully near the edge of the yard, their figures calm and watchful beneath the moonlight. Caleb remained on the porch, still trying to take in what had just happened. Only hours ago, this place had been empty. Now it felt like the center of something important. Ayanna stood beside him, her children wrapped in blankets just behind her. The little girl leaned against her leg, her eyes half closed with sleep, while the boy watched the riders with silent fascination. One of the men stepped forward again. He looked older, his face lined with age and experience. His hair, streaked with gray, was tied back neatly, and his eyes were steady and kind. He spoke to Ayanna quietly. She listened, then nodded. Turning to Caleb, she said, "This is my uncle, Dakota. He has been leading the search." Dakota stepped closer and placed his hand over his heart once more. Caleb wasn't sure of the exact meaning, but the gesture felt deeply respectful. Instinctively, Caleb nodded back. Ayanna translated softly, "He says, he thanks you for protecting us." Caleb shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't protect anyone. I just gave them a place to sleep." Dakota spoke again, his voice low and steady. Ayanna listened, then smiled faintly. "He says that in times like these, giving shelter is the same as protection." The words stayed with Caleb. For a few moments, no one spoke. The wind moved across the plains, brushing through the tall grass. The horses shifted their weight, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out into the night. Ayanna looked at the sky, then back at her people. "They will leave at sunrise," she said quietly. "They have been riding for days." Caleb nodded slowly. "They're welcome to stay here tonight. There's room in the barn for the horses. I've got water, feed." Ayanna hesitated, as if unsure how to respond to such a generous offer. Then she turned and spoke to Dakota. The older man listened carefully. His eyes moved across the ranch, the house, the barn, the fences, the land. After a moment, he nodded. Ayanna faced Caleb again. "He says, your kindness will not be forgotten." Caleb gave a small smile. "No need to remember it. Just get some rest." Within the hour, the quiet yard settled into a peaceful rhythm. The riders took care of their horses, leading them gently toward the barn. Some built a small fire at a safe distance from the house. Their movements were calm and respectful, careful not to disturb anything. Inside, Caleb added more wood to the fireplace. The warmth filled the room again, pushing back the cold night air. The children had already fallen asleep, their small faces relaxed for the first time since he had met them. Ayanna stood near the window, watching the soft flicker of firelight outside. "You can sleep in the room," Caleb said. "I'll stay out here." She shook her head. "You have done enough. I will sit for a while." He nodded and took a seat near the table. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ayanna broke the silence. "When we left our village," she said softly, "we thought the journey would be short." Caleb looked up. "But there were problems. Some people didn't want us near. Some turned us away. Some were cruel." Her voice didn't carry anger. Just tired truth. "My husband passed away last winter," she continued. "After that, it became harder to stay. We went to find work. Somewhere new." Caleb didn't interrupt. He could hear the pain between her words. "We got separated from our people during a storm near the hills," she said. "For days, we wandered. I tried to stay strong for my children." She looked toward the bedroom where they slept. "But I didn't know how much longer we could keep going." Caleb leaned forward slightly. "You made it this far." A faint smile touched her lips. "Because you opened your door." Those words felt heavier than any thanks he had ever received. The fire crackled softly. "I lost my family too," Caleb said after a moment. His voice was low, as if he wasn't used to speaking about it. "Years ago, sickness came through this land. Took everyone in a matter of weeks." Ayanna turned toward him, her eyes full of quiet understanding. "That is why you live alone," she said. He nodded once. It was easier. No one to lose again. The words hung in the air. Outside, the sound of gentle conversation drifted in from the yard, carried by the wind. It was strange, but comforting. The ranch didn't feel so empty anymore. Ayanna stepped closer to the fire, holding her hands out to the warmth. "In our tradition," she said, "we believe that when people cross paths in times of need, it is not an accident." Caleb looked at her. "It is a sign," she continued. "A reminder that no one is meant to walk alone forever." He didn't know how to respond to that. But something inside him stirred. The night passed slowly. At some point, Caleb must have dozed off in his chair, because when he opened his eyes, the room was filled with the soft gray light of early morning. He stood and stepped outside. The sky was just beginning to brighten, streaked with pale pink and gold. The riders were already awake, quietly preparing for the day. Horses were being saddled, blankets rolled up, fires put out carefully. Dakota stood near the fence, looking out across the land. Caleb walked over. For a moment, they stood side by side in silence. Then Dakota spoke, his voice calm and deep. Ayanna soon approached and translated. He says this land is strong, she said. It has survived many storms. Caleb nodded. It has. Dakota spoke again. Ayanna's voice softened as she translated. He says, so have you. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. Ayanna turned and called for her children. They came running, their faces brighter than they had been the day before. The little girl ran up to Caleb and wrapped her arms around his leg without warning. He froze for a second, surprised. Thank you, she said in a small voice. The boy stood beside her, trying to look brave. We liked your house. Caleb smiled, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. You're welcome here anytime. Ayanna watched the moment quietly. Soon, it was time to leave. The riders mounted their horses one by one. The early sun cast long shadows across the plains. The windmill turned slowly, creaking in the morning air. Ayanna stepped forward, facing Caleb. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she reached into a small pouch tied at her waist. She pulled out a simple, hand-carved pendant made of smooth wood, shaped like a small circle with delicate markings. She held it out to him. This is from my family, she said softly. It is given to someone who shows true kindness. Please take it. Caleb hesitated. I can't. You can, she said gently. And you must, so that you remember, you have friends on this land. He slowly took the pendant. It felt warm in his hand. Before he could speak again, something unexpected happened. Ayanna stepped closer and placed her hand over his for a brief moment. Her voice was quiet but steady. If you ever need help, she said, we will come. Then she stepped back. The riders began to move, one by one, heading out across the open plains. The sound of hooves grew softer as they rode away, disappearing into the golden morning light. Caleb stood there long after they were gone. The ranch was quiet again. But it wasn't the same kind of quiet. Inside his hand, the small wooden pendant rested, a reminder that somewhere beyond the hills, there were people who remembered him. People who were grateful. People who cared. He turned and walked slowly back toward the house. The wind moved gently through the grass, and for the first time in years, the loneliness didn't feel quite as heavy. Days passed, then weeks. Life returned to its usual rhythm. Fences needed mending. Horses needed feeding. The land demanded attention, as it always had. But sometimes, when Caleb stepped outside at night and looked across the plains, he found himself wondering where Ayanna and her people were. If they had reached home safely. If the children were warm and well. One evening, as the sun began to set, he heard something in the distance. Hoofbeats. He turned, his heart lifting slightly. A single rider approached, moving quickly across the land. As the figure came closer, Caleb recognized her. Ayanna. She pulled her horse to a stop near the fence and dismounted. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she smiled. We found a place, she said. A good place. Work. A home. Relief washed over him. That's good. She nodded. I came to tell you. And to thank you again. The wind carried the scent of dust and grass between them. Then she said something that caught him completely off guard. We will be building not far from here, she said. Our people will settle near the river. Caleb blinked. Close by. She nodded. Yes. For the first time in years, the land didn't feel endless and empty. It felt connected. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of red and gold, Caleb realized something had changed. The lonely ranch wasn't so lonely anymore. Morning came gently over the plains, carrying with it the soft warmth of a new beginning. For the first time in years, Caleb woke not to silence, but to the faint, distant sound of life. Somewhere far off, he could hear the low echo of hammering. Horses. Voices carried by the wind. Ayanna and her people had settled near the river just a few miles away, exactly as she had said. At first, the change felt strange. For so long, Caleb had lived in a world where days passed without seeing another soul. Now, every so often, he would spot riders crossing the distant hills. Thin trails of smoke would rise into the sky from the direction of the river. Sometimes, in the evening, He could even hear laughter carried across the land when the wind blew just right. It didn't disturb him. If anything, it comforted him. Weeks turned into months. One afternoon, Caleb was repairing part of the barn roof when he noticed a familiar figure riding toward the ranch. He wiped the dust from his hands and climbed down slowly, shading his eyes against the sun. It was the young boy, Ayanna's son. The child rode carefully on a small horse, his posture straight and determined. As he got closer, Caleb recognized him fully. The same bright eyes, the same quiet courage. The boy pulled to a stop near the fence. "Hello," he called, his voice stronger than before. Caleb smiled. "Hello there." The boy slid down from the horse and walked forward. "My name is Kiona," he said. "My mother sent me." Caleb nodded. "Good to see you again, Kiona. You've grown braver." Kiona looked proud at that. "We live near the river now. We built houses. My uncle says the land is good." "I'm glad," Caleb said honestly. The boy held out a small cloth bundle. "My mother made this for you." Caleb took it gently and opened it. Inside were fresh flatbreads, still warm, wrapped carefully in cloth. "For your kindness," Kiona said. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest again, that same quiet feeling he had felt the night they first arrived. "Thank you," he said. "Tell your mother I'm grateful." Kiona nodded, but he didn't leave right away. Instead, he looked around the ranch with curious eyes. "Can I see the horses?" he asked. Caleb chuckled softly. "Of course." They walked together to the barn. The horses lifted their heads as they entered, snorting softly. Kiona moved carefully, his small hand reaching out to touch one of them. "This one is strong," he said in awe. "That's Rusty," Caleb replied. "He's been with me a long time." Kiona turned to him. "Will you teach me to ride like you?" The question was simple, but it carried something deeper. Caleb paused. Then he nodded. "Yes, I can teach you." From that day on, things began to change even more. Kiona started visiting once or twice a week. Sometimes he came alone. Sometimes Ayanna came with him. Other times, one of the older men rode alongside, always respectful, always friendly. Caleb taught the boy how to sit steady in the saddle, how to hold the reins, how to guide the horse gently instead of forcing it. Kiona learned quickly. He listened carefully, tried hard, never complained, and slowly, the ranch began to feel different. Laughter returned to the barn. Small footsteps ran across the yard. Voices filled the quiet spaces that had once been empty. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Ayanna arrived with her daughter, Sani. The little girl ran straight to Caleb the moment she saw him. "Look," she said, holding up a small flower she had picked. He crouched down and smiled. "That's a beautiful one," she beamed proudly. Ayanna stood nearby, watching the moment with soft eyes. "You have been kind to him," she said quietly as Kiona brushed one of the horses. "He's a good kid," Caleb replied. "He works hard." Ayanna nodded. "He talks about you, often. Says you are teaching him to be strong." Caleb wasn't sure what to say to that. They stood side by side, watching the children. "Our village is growing," Ayanna said. "We are building more homes, planting crops near the river. People are happy there." "I'm glad," Caleb said. She glanced at him. "You should visit someday." He shifted slightly. "I wouldn't want to intrude." "You wouldn't," she said firmly. "You are welcome." A few days later, Caleb found himself riding toward the river for the first time. The land changed as he got closer. The dry plains softened into greener patches. The sound of flowing water grew louder. And then he saw it. A small village stood along the riverbank. Simple homes made of wood and earth. Smoke rising gently into the sky. Children running. People working together. It wasn't large, but it was full of life. As he approached, several people noticed him. There was a moment of stillness. Then Dakota stepped forward. He smiled and lifted his hand in greeting. Caleb nodded respectfully. Soon, Ayanna appeared, her face lighting up with surprise. "You came," she said. "You invited me," he replied. She led him through the village. People watched him with curiosity, but not with fear. Some nodded, some smiled. Kiona ran up excitedly. "You found us." Caleb laughed softly. "Wasn't hard. Just followed the river." They spent the afternoon together. Caleb helped repair part of a fence near the crops. He shared stories about the ranch. Dakota showed him the new well they had built. For the first time in many years, Caleb felt like he was part of something. Not just a man alone on a patch of land, but someone connected. As the sun began to set, the village gathered near the river. A small fire was lit. People sat together, talking quietly. Ayanna handed Caleb a cup of warm tea. "This place feels different at night," she said. He looked around. The firelight flickered across smiling faces. Children leaned against their parents. The river moved softly nearby. "It feels like home," he said without thinking. Ayanna's expression softened. Later, as the stars filled the sky, Dakota stood and spoke. His voice was calm but strong. Ayanna translated quietly for Caleb. "He says, our people remember what you did. You helped one of our own when she had nothing. That makes you family to us." Caleb felt caught off guard. Family. It was a word he hadn't heard directed at him in years. Dakota stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. The moment was simple, but it meant everything. When Caleb finally rode back to his ranch that night, the plains didn't feel so empty anymore. Days passed into more months. Kiona grew stronger with every visit. He learned to ride well, learned to care for the horses, learned to mend fences. One afternoon, while they worked, the boy asked quietly, "Do you get lonely?" Caleb paused. "Sometimes," he admitted. Kiona thought for a moment. Then he said, "You can come to our village when you feel that way." The innocence in his voice made Caleb smile. "Maybe I will," he said. And he did. The visits became regular. Sometimes they came to the ranch. Sometimes he went to the village. The distance between them no longer felt like distance at all. Then one day, something happened that none of them expected. A powerful storm rolled across the plains, darker and stronger than any Caleb had seen in years. The wind howled. The sky turned nearly black. Rain fell in sheets, pounding the land. Caleb worked through the night securing the barn and animals. Trees bent under the force of the storm. Fences snapped. By morning, the damage was everywhere. And his first thought wasn't about the ranch. It was about the village near the river. Without wasting time, he saddled Rusty and rode out. The land was soaked and muddy. Branches lay scattered. The river had risen, its waters moving fast and dangerously high. As he got closer, his heart tightened. Part of the village had flooded. People were moving quickly, trying to save what they could. Some homes near the river had taken in water. Caleb rode in and dismounted. "What can I do?" he asked Ayanna, who was helping move supplies. Relief crossed her face. "We need to move the children and elders to higher ground." Caleb nodded. "I'll help." All day, they worked together. Carrying belongings, leading people to safer areas, securing animals. The storm had tested them. But it hadn't broken them. By evening, the rain slowed. The sky cleared. Everyone was safe. Tired but relieved, they gathered together on a dry patch of land. Dakota looked at Caleb and nodded deeply. Ayanna stepped forward, her voice filled with emotion. "You came," she said, "even when you didn't have to." Caleb looked around at the people, at Kiona, Sani, Dakota, and all the others. "You would have done the same," he said quietly. And in that moment, he realized something with complete certainty. The knock on the door that night, months ago, hadn't just changed their lives. It had changed his. Because the lonely rancher wasn't lonely anymore. He had found something he thought was gone forever. A place where he belonged. The storm left its mark long after the rain stopped. In the days that followed, the land slowly began to dry, but the river still ran higher than usual, its waters moving fast and restless. The village near the river had survived, but several homes had been damaged, and fields of young crops were flattened by the heavy winds and water. Caleb found himself riding there almost every morning. At first, he told himself it was just to help. There were fences to rebuild, wood to cut, and ground to level again. Strong hands were needed, and he had spent his entire life working the land. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He cared. As he rode closer one morning, he saw people already at work. Men were lifting broken beams. Women were gathering what could be saved from the soaked homes. Children carried small bundles, doing what little they could. Ayanna stood near the riverbank, directing a group as they worked to reinforce the ground where the water had eaten away part of the soil. When she saw Caleb approach, her face softened with relief. You came early, she said as he dismounted. Couldn't sleep, he replied, tying Rusty to a post. Figured I might as well make myself useful. She gave a small smile. You always do. They walked together along the edge of the damaged area. The ground was still wet under their feet, sinking slightly with each step. The water almost reached the center of the village, she said quietly. If the rain had lasted one more night. She didn't finish the sentence. Caleb looked out at the river. But it didn't. She nodded. Kiona came running toward them, his clothes dusty and his hands covered in dirt. We moved the last of the wood, he announced proudly. Caleb smiled. Good work. The boy beamed, then ran back to help the others. For the rest of the morning, Caleb worked alongside Dakota, lifting and setting new support beams for one of the damaged homes. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. There was a quiet understanding between them, built over months of shared effort and trust. By midday, the sun had grown warm, drying the land bit by bit. Ayanna brought water for everyone, passing cups around. As Caleb drank, he noticed something. Despite the damage, the village wasn't filled with despair. People were tired, yes. Their work was hard, but there was laughter too. Encouragement. A shared strength that held them together. No one worked alone. That evening, as the sun began to set, Caleb finally prepared to head back to his ranch. He said goodbye to Dakota and waved to Kiona and Sani, who were helping carry tools. But before he could mount his horse, Ayanna called out to him. Wait. He turned. She walked toward him slowly, her hands folded together. There is something I want to show you, she said. He nodded and followed her toward the far edge of the village, where the land rose slightly above the river. From there, the view stretched wide across the plains. A few new wooden posts had been placed in a small clearing. Caleb looked at them curiously. What's this? Ayanna stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the open space. This land is strong, she said. High enough to stay safe when the river rises. He waited, sensing there was more. She took a breath. We want to build something here. A place for gathering, for learning, for the children. Caleb nodded slowly. That sounds like a good idea. Ayanna looked at him then, her expression serious but gentle. We hoped you might help us. Caleb blinked. Me, you know how to build, how to shape wood, how to make things strong so they last. He looked back at the empty clearing. For a moment, memories returned. The old days, when he had built parts of his own ranch with his father. The long hours, the careful work, the pride in seeing something stand tall when it was finished. I can help, he said quietly. Ayanna's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if she had been holding that breath for a while. Thank you. The next morning, the work began. Caleb arrived early, bringing tools from his ranch. Heavy hammers, extra nails, strong rope. Ayanna and several others were already there, clearing the ground and measuring space. Dakota walked up and placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. Ayanna translated his words. He says this place will stand for many years. And part of it will always belong to you. Caleb shook his head. It belongs to all of you. Dakota smiled. Day by day, the structure began to take shape. First came the foundation, then the frame. Tall wooden beams rose slowly into the sky. Everyone worked together. Even the older children helped carry smaller pieces. Kiona stayed close to Caleb most of the time, watching carefully. Why do you place the wood like that? He asked one day. So it holds the weight better, Caleb explained, adjusting a beam. If you rush, it won't last. Kiona nodded seriously, as if memorizing every word. As the sun dipped low that evening, Caleb stood back and looked at what they had built so far. It wasn't finished yet. But it was strong. It meant something. Weeks passed, and slowly, the building was completed. It stood solid and proud on the high ground, its roof stretching wide, its walls sturdy against wind and rain. The day it was finished, the whole village gathered there. Children ran inside, their laughter echoing through the open space. Elders sat along the walls, smiling quietly. A small fire burned safely in the center, filling the room with warmth. Caleb stood near the entrance, unsure where to place himself. Then Dakota stepped forward. He spoke to the gathered people, his voice calm but filled with emotion. Ayanna stood beside him, translating softly for Caleb. He says this place will protect our children. It will keep our stories alive. It will give us strength in hard times. Dakota turned and looked directly at Caleb. And he says, this place stands because a man who once lived alone chose to open his door. Caleb felt the room grow quiet around him. Ayanna stepped closer. We want you to know something, she said. You are not a visitor here. You are part of this place now. The words settled deep in his chest. For years, Caleb had believed he didn't belong anywhere except his lonely ranch. But now, standing in that warm, crowded room, surrounded by people who looked at him with respect and kindness, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt at home. That night, after the gathering ended, Caleb rode back slowly under the stars. The plains stretched wide and calm, the wind gentle against his face. When he reached his ranch, he paused outside, looking at the familiar house. It didn't feel as empty as it once had. The next morning, as he stepped onto the porch, he noticed something near the fence. Kiona stood there, holding a small wooden box. You forgot this, the boy said, walking up. Caleb frowned slightly. Forgot what? Kiona opened the box. Inside was the wooden pendant Ayanna had given him months ago. Caleb touched his chest instinctively. It wasn't there. He must have dropped it while working. Relief washed over him. Thank you. Kiona handed it to him carefully. My mother says it means you are always welcome, the boy said. Caleb closed his hand around the pendant. I know, he replied softly. Kiona looked around the ranch. It still feels quiet here. Caleb smiled faintly. It does. The boy thought for a moment. Then he asked, do you still feel lonely? Caleb looked out across the land. He thought about the voices at the village. The laughter, the work, the shared meals, the way people called his name when he arrived. He shook his head slowly. No, he said, not anymore. Kiona smiled, and as the morning sun rose over the plains, lighting the land in gold, Caleb realized something simple but powerful. The knock on his door that night had brought more than strangers asking for shelter. It had brought purpose, it had brought family, and it had filled the quiet spaces of his life with something he thought he had lost forever.